Hey, what's up? This is Chosen, and this is going to be a Raid Shadow Legends video about GENBO the Dishonored and how to use him effectively as a nuker in Raid, because he was a prime gaming drop in February of 2023. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to produce an infographic and do some deep depth analysis on how to build him and use him effectively in game. Let's get into it. Alrighty, now GENBO is going to be a Void Affinity Epic in the Shadowkin, and his specialty is AoE nuking in the arena to blast down champions that are able to place unkillable buffs on themselves, which makes them annoying to deal with. And as always, for my champion builds and guides down below, I will have an infographic that you can pull up, which kind of all encompasses what we're going to talk about in this video. So if that's all you're here for, if that's all you wanted, boom, that's down below for you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and maybe just throw a subscribe on the channel and a like on the video on your way out. But for those of you that would like a more deep dive analysis of GENBO, that is what we're going to do right now. So, okay, really quickly for the abilities, you've got an A1 that is a multi-hitter and can steal any increased attack buffs, and each hit also has a 30% chance of stealing a random buff, and the increased attack buff steal cannot be resisted. Now, that actually is really important because we don't want to be building a GENBO with any accuracy. We want to be prioritizing crit damage and attack and stuff like that. We don't want to have to build another stat. So the fact that it cannot be resisted means it synergizes really well within his kit. Then the A2 here is going to be his nuking ability, attacking all enemies with a booked up 100% chance of decreasing the duration of all buffs by 1 turn, and that effect cannot be resisted as long as he crits, which he's probably going to be because you'll be building him with enough crit rate to be an effective damage dealer. But the cool thing about his nuke is because of this A3 that places a 30% crit rate buff and a 30% crit damage buff on him for 3 turns, not just 2 turns, then grants an extra turn. That means we can turn that 30% crit rate bonus into just building him with 70% crit rate, so we can get extra crit damage, extra attack, and we've got more room for other roles. Makes him a lot easier to get built as an effective damage dealer in the early and mid game when you only have to get to that 70% crit rate threshold, because this grants an extra turn. And it's really cool that GENBO has that grant extra turn self buff, because when we see champions that don't have an extra turn on a self buff, like Candrafon is a really good example, he's got this really cool ability here called On the Hunt, where he gets Veil, increase attack, increase speed, increase crit damage, but it doesn't grant an extra turn. So you'll honestly see some people, when they use Candrafon, they'll just turn that off. Like they just don't want him to even use it. They want him doing damage as a priority every single turn, so they literally just shut off a pretty cool ability. But GENBO does not have to worry about that, as it will grant an extra turn, so it makes him a very effective damage dealer. Then we have a passive immune to decrease attack debuffs, and the best part of his passive here is will ignore unkillable buffs when attacking under an increased attack buff, which he's mostly always going to be, because you're going to bring him with somebody like an Arbiter that will boost up his attack or something like that if you're using him in a nuking context. And also he can do it himself with the A1 here, where it can't be resisted and all of that. So very cool that he ignores unkillable buffs for those annoying champions that you'll come across in the arena, like your Skull Crowns and your Leorius. And then he's also got an aura here of arena speed by 20%, which makes sense because he is an arena champion primarily. Then for the base stats, everything is mostly what we would expect. The HP is low, but he's a nuker, so it's acceptable and pretty standard. The attack is pretty decent for an epic at 1409. The defense at 958. The speed, yeah, most all of that makes sense. There isn't a whole lot notable there. But something that is notable that I want to talk about here a little bit is people are always curious about the multipliers of the abilities. So his nuking ability, you can see over here on the right, is going to be a 4 times attack. Now he's got a 1409 base attack with a nuking ability of a 4 multiplier. Now, people are always going to want to compare him to Skull Crown. So if we pull up Skull Crown, then we can see that the Skull Crown has a little bit more base attack. It's actually exactly 100. It's 1509 versus 1409. And then Skull Crown does have a 4.3 multiplier instead of the 4.0. So Skull Crown is going to scale up to do a little bit more damage than a GENBO because the multiplier is a little bit better. It's like 7 or 8% better or so than GENBO's, but she also has the better base attack, so it's going to be a little bit easier to scale up Skullcrown's attack, but I think that's acceptable because Genbo is bringing you the utility of ignoring the unkillable, which is very handy for the role that he is scaling in. So I think it is a pretty good trade-off. The Skullcrown is going to do a little bit more damage. Skullcrown and Genbo are kind of thought of as the void affinity nukers that comes to everybody's mind when they're thinking about that role. And I think it mostly makes sense. The Skullcrown hits a little bit harder and scales a little bit better, but Genbo has a little bit more utility, and Genbo can be built for 70% crit rate, which is going to help him kind of make up that difference by getting extra attack and extra crit damage. So now let's head on over to the Genbo I've got built here. Let's talk about the building process, the skills, the masteries, and the sets to consider. So when you look at the sets that I've got on him, they are mostly fine. The perception you don't really need on him. You're not getting any utility or much utility out of the accuracy. I ended up slapping another perception piece on him because of the crit damage gloves that made sense I had laying around to use. Genbo on my account is not going to be wearing my best DPS gear. It's going to be on like Trunda and Rotos and Baron and stuff like that. But if I was using him a lot more instead of these niche roles, then he would have better sets. So I would go with the set recommendations on the infographic that I put down below. As you can see, we've got things like Lethal, Savage would both be amazing on him. And then after that, you can go with like Fatal, Cruel, Divine Crit Rate, Crit Damage, and stuff like that for the set choices if he's going to be a priority nuker on your account. Then for the stats on the individual pieces, the banner, you're almost always going to want to go attack. Remember, we want to scale up his attack as high as possible. And then just make sure we're hitting 70% crit rate. And we don't really need to worry about accuracy or resistance. It doesn't really work within his role. So the amulet, always going to be crit damage. And then the ring, if you can get like reaction or blood shield, that's great. And then you're stacking as much attack as you can get. The boots, you want enough speed for him to function within the nuking role of your arena team, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but can make perfect sense to go attack percent boots on him as long as you can get enough speed, substat, speed, glyphs, and stuff like that so he can still get his turn within the nuking context. The chest, you're always going to want the attack percent. And then the gloves, either crit rate or crit damage, whichever helps you. Probably most typically going to be crit damage because we only need to get him to 70% crit rate, which helps us use crit damage gloves a little bit more easy. And then up top, we're just looking for attack, crit rate, crit damage, and some of the stats that we listed as the primary over there on the right side of the infographic. Then this one's going to hurt a little bit. The booking process is a little bit rough for Genbo. He likes to read, and he likes to read a lot. We've got the A1 with 8 books, plus 5 is 13 on the A2, plus 2 is 15 books to max this guy out. If you can save a couple on the A1, it's probably not the worst in the world. It's going to be tough to max, like the A1 takes so many books that it's going to be tough to max out your A2 and your A3. Now, the nice thing is you can make a case that you don't really have to, book him. He can be at least usable because when we're using him in a nuking context, the cooldowns aren't really that big of a deal. You blast everything down, you do your abilities once, and boom, the game is over because he's most commonly used in the arena. But it would just mean you're not getting some of the extra utility, like the decreasing duration of the buffs that cannot be resisted, and then also being able to kind of cycle through in some of those battles that last a little bit longer. But he actually can be fine without the books. Just realize you're gonna also do 20% less damage because you do get that on your way towards booking up his nuke here on the A2. Then for the masteries, I'm going to put away the camera for a little bit just to make sure I'm not blocking anything. But yeah, so under the offense tree, we obviously want to take something like Helm Smasher. That's going to be great for ignoring defense and helping him nuke harder. And then kind of the standard route just to make sure we are nuking, first hit damage and all the different stuff that you're going to want to take advantage of in the arena. And we don't really need to go down the support tree very much, so you can just go defense tree, kind of standard masteries there. The offense tree is going to be the most important one here on Genbo. Then when we're going to be thinking about taking Genbo into action, I think the arena is going to be where he shines the most, and he is going to function the best in a go first nuke team. So you pair him with somebody like an Arbiter who is a speed lead that's supposed to go fast and then boost up Genbo's turn meter, boost up his attack. You've got a buff stripper and a defense breaker like a Madame Saris, and then Genbo comes on the backside of the rotation and cleans up, demolishing everything. Now he is going to shine the best in teams like you see right here that I'm going up against, a Skull Crown. So GENBO is going to be able to blast down that Skull Crown and wipe her off the battlefield without her being able to save herself with that unkillable, because his passive will ignore the unkillable. Now, that means a battle like this would come down to who wins the speed battle. So as long as we win the speed battle, we're going to win the match, and we're going to take down the Skull Crown. So we won the speed. We're off to the races. We just make sure GENBO has enough speed to go within the rotation. Saris is going to nuke everything down. And then GENBO, we see right there, that was the self buff that he did. And now the self buff is on cooldown. He did that on auto when I hit the auto button. Now he is going to completely blast down the enemy team. And the Skull Crown that you see up in the top left will not be able to survive and proc her unkillable effect, because GENBO was able to ignore that via the passive. And since Skull Crown is insanely common in the arena, especially in the mid game, a lot of people have her as a nuker. That means GENBO can be really fun to have in your arena farming team. And I actually used him on my main account for a long time, and it's really not a bad idea to have him, like, to slot him into a team that you build. Like, if you go into the team setup, it's really not a bad idea to have an unkillable nuke team where GENBO is featured, just to kind of check that box and go into the arena with him as your nuker whenever you come across teams like the one that you just saw me go up against. Then for the fun part, let's go over the grades here for GENBO and pull up a little template here to talk about this for a little bit. So on a 1 to 10 scale, book value, I mean, I'd put him at like an 8. He's not going to be the godliest support progression type champion, but he does have a role in the game. So I think if you are in a position where you're booking him and building him, you'll get decent value out of it. The arena, I'd go like an 8.5. You know, he's not like a Duchess or something crazy, but he does have a really carved out niche to do well in that role. The Hydra, he's really not going to be that great there. I mean, like your average damage dealer or so. Demon Lord, similarly, just kind of like doing random damage, and the self buffing is decent. Faction Wars, I'd go like a 7.8. Not bringing a whole lot of utility, but he can lower he can lower some of the buff duration and be a decent late feature to damage dealer in Faction Wars, so he's fine. Doom Tower, you know, like a 7 something, kind of a niche damage dealer. Dungeons, pretty similarly, yeah, somewhere around there. And then Scarcity, I think this is a decent score because he does have the passive that ignores the unkillable, and he can buff himself to be 70% crit rate, which is decently rare in the game. So I'd honestly go like an 8 on Scarcity and go right there. So grades out as a 7, but it is a pretty solid 7 because like his grades are all over the place. He's like good or bad. He's not like gonna do well in the context of a tier list where you're looking at the game as a whole, but he does succeed very well in his specific role that you're going to be using him in. So his grade on a tier list can be a little bit deceiving. I think you can get value on the right account for building him for sure. So that was our deep dive discussion about GENBO the Dishonored. It would mean a lot if you subscribe and like the video on your way out down below. And also I have that infographic like we talked about if you want to pull that up to have on your end. And good luck if you are building a GENBO, and good luck smashing in the arena with him. And let me know what you think about GENBO as a champion down below. I always enjoy hearing your opinions where you agree and disagree and all of that as well. So that'll do it for me on this one as always. Thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.